Hi, and welcome to the second book review video that we have, or I have at least. So yeah, today I will be talking about, this book called A Girl Named Disaster. I think the camera is mirrored or not mirrored, but this is gonna be backwards. But it's called A Girl Named Disaster by Nancy Farmer. I got this book back in I think middle school during the summer reading program through the library. And yes, this is I reread it recently and I really like this book. It's hard for me to not like a book, in the sense that I'm oh my gosh, I DNF'd it, I hate it, I would not recommend it. I usually like most books, so if that sounds repetitive, that's why. Yeah, this one, I think a solid, I gave it a 5 stars. Yeah, I think for me, it was 5-star worthy. But it's about this girl named, Namo. I think her name is Namo. It's spelled Nhamo, and it's in the Shona language, which is a language in Zimbabwe and Mozambique in Africa. So I'm probably butchering that, but that's her name, and that it translates in English to disaster. So that's why Girl Named Disaster. But essentially she lives in this village in Zimbabwe, and her mother went to school in a Catholic school, I think, and she comes home married to this guy called Proud Jungwa. I'm butchering these names, but they come home, she's pregnant, she has this kid, our main character, and then her mother ends up unfortunately dying by a leopard, I believe, and her father went back to where he was from in Zimbabwe before she was born, I think. So she grows up in this village. She's around 11 years old, and at some point their village ends up getting struck by sickness, and they go to this doctor in this trading post to, apparently they believe it's spirits that are doing this to them. So they go to this doctor and this trading post near the village and saying we need help, can you tell us what spirit is causing this sickness? And they're well, the spirit is this dude who her father had killed, and this person had a brother, or he has a brother, and the spirit hypothetically communicates saying, I need some sort of retribution for getting killed by her father. So he says that I need a son to pass on his legacy, I guess. And he's to do that you have to marry my brother. So her family, her uncle primarily, tries to marry, set up the marriage to the brother of the dead dude. And the brother, he already has a wife and I think kids, and he is a character. So they try to marry her off to him, and the grandmother is very much against this. But when they went to visit the doctor, she had a stroke, and since she had a stroke, she couldn't like move I think her left side of the body, and she couldn't speak. So then she has a stroke, and they have to stay in the trader post for a while so she can like recover well enough to go back to the village. And while they're there, they're like, she's the girl, Namo, is taking care of the grandmother, because they're decided to keep the grandmother at the trader post. Like the person who runs the trade post, they decide to keep her in his house so she has some comfort. So she's there, she gets to know the people around her, and the trader's post guy's wife says, oh, why don't you just stay with us, because you're bound to be married off anyway, you could just stay with us and have a better life. And Namo is like, yeah, sure, I would like that. And the grandmother seems more like responsive when they bring that up, so they're like, okay, we can go talk to your uncle. The uncle says, no, because he's like, well, the spirit is terrorizing us and like giving us sickness, so of course we want to like appease the spirit and like give it what it wants so we can get rid of the sickness. So then they take the grandmother back to their village, and they're like, okay, great, now we have to like set up the marriage and stuff. And eventually the grandmother, turns out she's talking, responsive. She did have a stroke, but she was faking how bad it affected her. And she tells Namo, girl, please leave, please, you don't need to, just go all you can, go to Zimbabwe, your father is there. And tells her to leave with one of the village, like the only village boat, to take some food from like their stores and the money that her grandmother had kept hidden. So she's like, but I can't leave like that. And then my grandmother's like, no, don't matter, just go. And she leaves and she embarks on this journey. It was supposed to be a 2-day upstream journey to Zimbabwe. It ends up taking, I think, around a year. But the book follows her journey, finding like her journey of going to Zimbabwe, like on this like boat journey. And obviously she ends up going there. She finds the border, and then she's been living in like the wilderness for nearly a year. So she obviously does not look as presentable as she could be. And she goes in, she ends up being run out by whatever village, town, city she ended up in. And she sees a family, and the family's like, that is not a regular person. So they end up running her out, and she ends up somehow getting sick while she's like running away from this family, and ends up in this random like cow pasture, something. And then she gets taken in by these scientists, because where she ended up was like a scientific facility. And then it follows how she is there and what happens to her, and how she like gets better and finds her family and like actually lives a decent life. But it's a long-winded summary of this book. It doesn't have much spoilers, but yeah, it just follows her journey through that boat ride, and then what happens to her after she comes to like people again. I really liked it. I think this book does a good job of like being in the mind of like a 12-year-old, and like the thought process that a kid would be going through if this were to like happen, or like in situations like this. So yeah, that was really just a long-winded summary of this book, but it does a good job with the writing. I think is pretty good. It's like it's not like anything crazy, but um it does a pretty good job at like how a 12-year-old would think and speak and act. Especially with like how like with how she grew up and how she like talks to like the scientists and stuff, because obviously she's not like used to being treated as like as normally of a kid, because like nowadays, like because she grew up doing like a lot more like chores and stuff and like manual labor, and because she lives in like a remote village in Zimbabwe, Africa, right? So that's not the same as if you would like you were living in like Nashville, Tennessee. Um so yeah, it was like it does a good job at like showing how she goes through that process of like getting used to living in like a more modern world and how she like thinks and stuff. So yeah, um yeah, I thought it did a pretty good job. I liked it. I would definitely recommend it. I'm gonna probably watch this back and be like, what was I rambling about? But if somebody finds this useful, I will be very happy. Um, so yeah, have fun, drive safe, please. This weather right now is crazy outside with all these like snowstorms and ice. So yeah, have fun, drive safe. Please don't do anything crazy.